thanks for coming down.
Thank you for having me.
You know, part of what we do here with our Facebook Lives is try and answer as many questions as possible for our viewers, but also educate them. And what better person to speak to than someone like yourself?
Oh, I'm very happy to be here.
Who's been running your investment property magazine now for how long did you say?
Well, I've been editor for 3 years, but I've been working on the magazine for 12 years, since the very second issue we ever did.
Yeah.
So, and I've been an investor myself for 15 years. I've seen lots of different market cycles, lots of ups and downs.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've seen a lot of different conditions, I guess you could say.
We're definitely going to talk about that because I'm very, you know, even myself, I always want to get another person's viewpoint to see how much reality mine actually has. But tell me, I mean, the first magazine I ever bought was Australian Property Investor Magazine, API, and I used to think that was the Bible. And when I first saw that as a beginner, I thought, man, for like $4, $5 back in early 2000s. I read that thing back to front, and then your investment property magazine came out, and then there were a couple of others. But
yep.
You guys have stood the test of time. It sounds like all the rest have collapsed. So what makes you guys different?
Oh, very good question. Well, yes, our first issue came out in 2007, so we've been around for 12 years. I couldn't say why the rest haven't survived, but I know for us, we have really tried to stay or keep in tune with what our readers want. We're very responsive to what they're looking for, which means we try to deliver all of our content in ways that can reach them the easiest way. So we have a full website with that gets updated daily with lots of fresh news stories. We have our magazine that comes out every month. And we're always looking for the hot topics. I mean, like you said before, educating is our number one goal. Having been investors, almost all of our team invest in property.
Awesome.
And we're all very passionate about property. So our goal is always just to educate people and show them what is possible, inspire them, show them, kind of hold their hand, because the thing about property investing is it can seem like an easy way to make money, or it can seem like, you know, especially people go and buy their own house and they think, oh, this is great, I bought this house and in 5 years it's grown in value and I should do this. It can seem like this quite easy way to build wealth, but there is so much that can go wrong. You need to have a strategy under it if you're going to do really well. So our goal is always thinking about people who are starting out and how to help them make the best decisions.
Yeah, yeah. It's so important. I mean, you and I were talking off camera before about, like, we haven't really, I've never seen anybody that builds wealth fast, you know. All the success stories that, you know, and our clients have some amazing successes, and I'm so happy for them. But I think one of the things that a lot of people don't see is just the amount of work that leads up to that, you know. It's like you're going for 10 years before you get that huge payoff.
Exactly.
Or that, like, you make that one purchase or that huge investment that it's just that blows everything else away.
Absolutely.
And then people just see that.
Absolutely.
But they don't see all the work, you know.
And the mistakes. And I think for me, you know, my very first investments were 15 years ago, and one of the first places I bought was about $180,000. And at the time, to me, that was just all the money in the world. I can remember like the fear in the pit of my stomach when I handed over the stamp duty check. Like that was all of my savings, and I was like, am I doing the right thing? It was terrifying. Yeah. But you know, those moments and those mistakes are what give you the confidence to move on. And I remember back then $180,000 felt like the most money in the world.
Absolutely.
Then when you're buying $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 homes, I would never have had the confidence to do that if I hadn't done those small steps. And I did make mistakes, and I did lose money along the way.
But your mistakes, like, what did they teach you? Because I've got some. I'm going to share my favourite mistake in a minute too. What did they teach you?
I mean, one of my worst mistakes was I didn't buy a house because they wouldn't allow pets. So when I lived in Sydney, I had 2 beautiful little dogs, and it was in the middle of Surrey Hills, a beautiful 1-bedroom apartment with parking for $300,000. And we signed the contract, put the deposit down, and then they came back and said, oh, you can't have pets. So we pulled out. And it's, you know, you torture yourself when you look it up. It's now worth $850,000. So that was, you know, $500,000 mistake. But my view of things and the way I sleep at night is I just think every road leads to where you're meant to be.
Yep.
I wouldn't be in the house I am now. I have a beautiful home. I wouldn't be in that house. I wouldn't have the investments I have, and I wouldn't be in the exact position I am now if I had done things differently. So yes, it would be really nice to have that extra $500,000 in the bank, but maybe if I'd done that, maybe I would have felt this overinflated sense of confidence and would have maybe taken that money, invested into something risky. You were just talking about these fast paths to wealth.
Yeah.
It can happen, but there is a lot of risk involved. You can develop and you can do these things, but you have to be prepared for them not to pay off, and that's a risk that people don't always factor in.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, like all the people I've studied, our biggest clients, even the way I've done it and all my mentors over the years, there's just, I've never seen a fast route to money, you know, and I have this, called a spiritual view, that money wants to know that you can actually hold on to it and look after it before it sits there with you for a long time.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, usually the ones that make it really fast have this is why I talk about these Tats Lotto winners, right?
I was just thinking that.
They win Tats Lotto, and they've never been accustomed to be able to hold on to so much money because they're what do you call it?
Well, their mindset is not...
Their mindset's not, I don't use the word programmed, but their mindset's not set up for them to be able to hold on to that kind of money and then get it to grow. So the minute they get it, it goes out the door just as fast. Because I'm a big believer that you're conditioned to have a certain amount of money unless you actually do something about it. And you know, you've seen the countless stories of people that just make it.
Yeah.
And then they end up on the news later, in about a year later, where the husband and the wife are separated because someone made it and didn't share it, and God knows.
Yeah.
But so with all your viewers and all your subscribers, what are the things that what's the questions that they ask? What do they really want to know when they contact you guys?
The biggest question we've had for the last 12 months has been, where do I buy next? Because I think for so long everyone was just focused on Sydney, Melbourne.
Yeah.
And so when they realised, when we could start to see that the growth wasn't there in Sydney anymore, people are just like, what do I do? Where do I go? And mainly people are saying, where is the next Sydney? Where am I going to get the next big boom of growth? So that again comes back to educating. We're trying to just share that that's not always how cycles go. You're not always going to have one market in Australia. Well, and that is another whole different ballgame. But there is no one market. Even a market like Sydney, there are countless little sub-markets in there. Even in Sydney now, there are some pockets that are still doing really well.
Quite well, yeah.
And there are some pockets that are doing much, much worse than the average. So people ask that question, and that is it's almost an impossible question to answer, because the right place for you to invest is different to the right place for me to invest, because it depends on our own risk profile, budgets, how many properties we've got, what our borrowing power is. We did a feature story about 6 months ago too about your life situation, because I think we get a lot of questions from people who are inspired by what they've seen others around them achieve. They want to invest in property, but at that point in time, maybe they've had their first child, they're pregnant with their second child, they're down one income, and they're like, I want to invest in property. And so my, thought is maybe not right now. Maybe have that plan to start in 2 years when you've got two incomes again. Don't put all that pressure on yourself right now. Excuse me. So I think it's really important to think about your own situation and what your long-term goals are. Because property is long term, and I've interviewed probably, in 12 years of being a real estate journalist, hundreds of investors, and without fail, the stories that I always walk away and go, God, I'm jealous, are the ones who said, well, I bought in 95, or I bought in 98, or I bought in 2002, and I held, and that's all they did. You just buy it and you hold it. You buy a really good quality asset in a good location and you hold it. And a separate discussion is you have to know when to let go of a poor performing property. But if you buy a good quality property and you hold it for 20, 30 years.
Actually, that's a really great statement you made just then. You've got to know when to let go of a really bad performing property. I want to take you up on that later,
Yeah, well, I think because we do push a buy, or people who invest know that buy and hold is a really good long-term strategy, but if you're holding on to a rotten egg that's not growing in value, that's not going to do any good for you. But if you just look at it really, really bare basics, if you buy a property today and you own it for 25 years, and in that 25 years your tenant pays the mortgage off for you, all you have to do is chip in a tiny bit extra along the way to get that mortgage down. In 25 years, you own it outright and it's paying you an income. That's a very simplified way of looking at owning a long-term asset. So if you just look at, I know 25 years is a long time away, but if you adopt that view, that's a good starting point to then go, okay, how else can I engineer this to go a bit faster if that's what you want? Or I don't want one, I want 3 properties, or whatever it may be. Once you figure out what your strategy is and what your goals are, it's not that hard to make it work. You just really have to know what you're doing, because there are so many potholes along the way.
And I think, it's funny, I was recording an article coming into the office this morning that we put that we transcribed into text for our blog post, and I spoke about the importance of planning and goal setting, because a lot of people, I mean, we live in an age today where we want everything instantly, that instant gratification. I remember growing up, and even my parents, they'd wait 10, 15 years to build that wealth, or even 20 years. But today, it's like, I want wealth by next week. Yeah. And you sit there with people, and it's like, property's not the right asset class to actually invest in if that's the speed you want to operate at, or not the buy and hold. But, I look at it, and, I think most Australians have built their wealth in real estate by doing the simple buy and hold over a long period of time. With all the people you've interviewed, all the investors you've interviewed, what's the one common theme that they all seem to have?
I can tell you immediately. So at the end of every interview, I always say, what's one thing you wish you could have done differently, or what's one thing that we haven't covered that you wanted to share? And I would say 99 times out of 100, I wish I'd started earlier.
Yeah.
I wish I'd started sooner, or I wish I had gotten advice sooner, because people often jump into their first property by themselves and they don't necessarily, make the right choices. They might take advice from their friends or their family, or they've seen their mate do really well, so I'm going to buy in the same area, or I love my street, so I'm going to buy in this area. So they do what's comfortable and what feels safe, which is actually possibly the least safe way to invest, but it feels comfortable to buy where you know. So people will make that first purchase, and often it's not ideal. So it's once they learn the value of getting advice that they go, imagine if I'd started with someone who was giving me proper advice, and I made, the first purchase I bought was a really good asset in a good area with good growth. Imagine how much further ahead I could be. But like I said before, I don't linger much on the what ifs. I just think know better, do better. Start from here and, try to improve.
Yeah. Well, it's spot on, and we preach the same thing to our clients. Property is a long-term journey, and we say that to everyone. And you need to get in early, because it's probably later than you think. I'll tell you something. When we have clients that come and see us at the age of like 55, 57, it disappoints us so greatly, because we actually can't help them. Yeah. We're not, and it's, when you get into that age, banks don't want to lend you money, or they put so many restrictions on lending criteria. Insurance companies don't want to insure you. Sadly, some employers don't want to have you continue working for them. So you're really at the wrong end of the stick. Yeah. If you leave it that long. So we keep encouraging. I've got three girls, and even my eldest, who's just, she's about 17 and a half. Like, get into the property market. Look at what your mum and dad have done and created. Get into the market. Because one of the stories I spoke about last week, I don't know how well you know the Melbourne market, but my dad advised me to get into a suburb called Albert Park. I know. Back when I was 19, and I won't tell you what I was doing at the age of 19. That's for another topic altogether. But and I paid no attention to him, because I thought, I'm 19. I just started working. I want to spend some of this income that I've got right now and have a good time. And that's probably one of the many times I should have listened to my dad. Crazy thing is, there was a property in Albert Park, 100 Richardson Street, Albert Park, that I think was selling for $97,000. Today, actually I looked it up 2 weeks ago. Today, it's on the market. It was on the market for it sold for just under $2 million.
Wow.
You know, and you sit down and you're like, that wouldn't have cost me anything. It wouldn't have affected my lifestyle whatsoever. I could have continued to have done everything I would have done, and I would have had literally an extra $2 million in my pocket right now for just surviving, for just living, for taking in oxygen.
Yeah.
And that's the cost.
Yeah.
That's the cost of not taking really good advice. Mm-hmm. That's the cost of not taking, and you know, that's a hard. Every time I drive through Albert Park, I'm this is nuts. So
yes. But do you know what? On that point is you look at something like that and go, wow, it's worth $2 million now, and you just think that's insane. But I then kind of look forward and I go, in 20 years' time, what are these properties going to be worth? Yeah. We look now and think, oh, everything's so expensive and it's so hard to get into the market and blah, blah, blah. But it's not going to get easier. You know, we might see some corrections. We might see property values fall a little bit more, but we're not going to see, you know, $2 million homes drop to $1 million. We're going to see slight corrections, but really good quality property is always, we're always going to need housing. We're always going to need property. So
that's a great question. What do you consider as really good? So what's the criteria you look for when you invest? What do you consider as really good quality property?
Yeah, so for me personally, and also what I kind of push in the magazine when I'm trying to encourage people to research their own investments, because we do a lot of stories about where to invest, but I always heavily, you know, caveat them with please do your own research, because you need to really make sure it fits with your own strategy. But it's got to be in a central location. So it needs to be where people want to be. So close to amenities, close to schools, close to restaurants, close to public transport, but not on public transport. So you want to be near trains, but you don't want like to hear the train. And it needs to be an area that is popular with renters, but not oversupplied by renters. So you don't want to be in a complex of 100 apartments where 80% of them are renters. And the reason for that is you've got 80% landlords and investors in there, and if one of them has to sell for a fire sale and they accept a low price, then that sets a new lower benchmark. So owner-occupiers are more stable. And there's a kind of I can't think of the right way to put it, but more of a pride in your home when you're an owner-occupier. So you want a really good kind of balance to look for is 30% renters to 70% owner-occupied. I think you can find good deals in regional towns, but I wouldn't advise rural. I think that's too risky. And in regional towns, again, you've got to go major regional, and you really have to do your research. One of my first investments was in Townsville, and I made some good money out of there at the time, but that was 12, 15 years ago. And we doubled our purchase prices on a few properties up there, but the market really hasn't moved. I think we were selling for around $300,000, and those same properties today are $330,000. So you have to really do your research into what's happening in these markets, and look at employment, population growth. Like there's a lot that goes into it, and it's not an exact science. That is always the trickiest part of it. Is you can do all the research, you can qualify it all, you can look historically and think you've got it all right and buy, and sometimes something happens that's completely out of your control, and that's part of the risk of investing. But then you look at, say, for instance, the mining boom and subsequent bust. I feel like
more in WA,
in WA and in Queensland.
Yeah.
But you could see that was unsustainable. Rents of $1,800 a week and $2,000 a week for a standard 3-bedroom home. That was never going to be a long-term play. So anyone who invested in that had to have a very high risk profile and had a clear exit strategy. So you're buying in, you're going to be there for 12 months, and then you're out. So many people got fooled by that or sucked into it because it seemed too good to be true. If it seems too good to be true, it generally is.
It's interesting because a lot of clients that have come to us. In fact, I got a phone call with a lady at 1 o'clock today. Hope she's watching. Who's I think has bought in WA, and the prices have just catapulted, and I think she owes $500,000 on an asset that's worth $300,000. And I think, you know, one of the things we say to people is you're either an investor or you're a speculator.
Yes.
And there's a difference, because if you look at a place like WA, and I've got property in Queensland, but if you look at a place like WA, there's been very, very little growth over like 20, 30 years. And when you're getting into a mining boom, the one thing that a lot of people didn't pick up, and I wouldn't even know how to do this, and that's to pick the bottom of the market and the top of the market. You know, and there's, you know,
well, the best way to do that is afterwards. You know, when you're in it, you can see the signs, but no one can definitively say this is it. And I think the real tragedy of those markets is that there were people who preyed on investors. There were kind of spruikers in the industry who preyed and advised on it, but just weren't giving people the right advice. Those were very much markets for people who, like I said, had a really clear agenda, clear exit strategy. Just, you know, it's far too risky I wouldn't personally invest in those types of places. But people went into it thinking that that's what was going to be. Like they were going to invest and get these $2,000 a week rents for 10 years or, you know, whatever they thought. And people's lives have been destroyed by that. I know people who have had investments in kind of the Mackay-Maramba area, and they're now in negative equity. They can't sell. They can't sell because if they sell, they'll go bankrupt. So it's, you know, those are really heartbreaking situations.
I think it comes down to having a fundamental, you've got to have a fundamental strategy in place. And I think you mentioned it before, Sarah, that there's certain principles that, you know, I'm, you know, been doing this for quite some time. There's certain principles that never let you down. So if you know how to do your research, but one of the things we talk about too is that, like, do your research fast, because I won't mention the person's name, but I've got a friend of mine who she's been researching the market since 2003. Right, and you know, you get to the point where it becomes silly.
Absolutely.
You know, it defeats the actual whole purpose of research. You're not a.
Well, it's no longer research. It's ridiculous. It's procrastination. We call it. We've done articles on it before. We call it analysis paralysis.
And but you know, I always, you know, the advice I give clients is do your research, but make sure you've got a good 15 to 20 years track record of the area you want to invest in performing well through a number of different property cycles. Right. So the 4 factors we look at is employment, population, existing infrastructure that you covered on, and planned infrastructure. And I think if you've got if you've got a solid foundation of those 4 factors in place,
you're on the right track.
You're on the right track. You know, ideally, everyone would like to. You know, we'd all like to invest in areas like Toorak or Canterbury or Mossman or Double Bay, but for a lot of people, they can't get into markets like that. So we just. You know, we look at it and say, the closest bit of real estate you can get your hands on to the water and the city, right, without being in the city, I think you'll do quite well. Yeah,
absolutely.
Now, the question, cash flow, positive cash flow, or capital growth? Because I get that every day.
This is a question I probably get at the magazine, if not once a week, once a fortnight. And my answer is a little bit infuriating because it depends. It depends on what your strategy is. If you are a doctor earning $400,000 a year, then don't go for a cash flow property because you are just going to pay more tax on it. If you are a lower income earner and you want negative gearing, and you want growth, which is, I think, ultimately everyone wants growth. No one wants to buy a property today worth $300,000 that's worth $300,000 in 10 years' time. So ultimately we all want growth, but the exact balance there is going to depend on what you want and what you can afford. All property investing should start with your own budget and knowing what your cost of living is, what you can afford. So you should know, this is how much income I have, this is what my life costs, and at the end of each month I have $500 left. Or some people do that exercise and go, oops, I don't have enough money for life, so I need to make some adjustments. But you can't answer that question until you know what your situation is and where you want to go. I know someone actually in that exact scenario who was a doctor earning a really good wage, went to a buyer's agent and said, here's my pool of money, I want a couple of investment properties. And the buyer's agent advised him into 2 properties that were both cash flow positive. And I was scratching my head and I said, why did he suggest that? Why did you do that? And he's like, oh, he told me these were good investments and they, you know, I make $200 a week off them. And I was like, but you're going to pay $100 a week in tax. You're at the highest tax bracket. So what growth are you getting? How are you going to be any better off in 5 years from where you are now with these investments? Whereas if you had bought growth properties, yes, they might have cost you $100 a week after tax, but they'll be worth how many hundreds of thousands of dollars more in 5 to 10 years. So you have to have a really clear strategy. A good strategy that works for a lot of people is balanced. So you buy one positive, one negative. The one that costs money is balanced out by the cash flow and the one that makes you money. That's a really kind of balanced way to invest. I think it's definitely alluring to have a property that pays you money each week, but you probably can't get the golden goose of both.
Yes. All right, so we're going to take a short break whilst we handle some battery issues. We'll be back in 10 minutes, so stay tuned, guys. And we're back. Sorry about that, guys. Now, question we got in the intermission, let's call it an intermission, was what advice would you give, Sarah, to millennials or Gen X's, Gen Z's, I think they call them, and we came up with it, young people.
Young people.
And you know what? I'm curious on your viewpoint with regards to people that can't come up with a deposit.
Yes, okay. So this, I would say, is not a new problem. I think young people have always struggled to get into the market. And that's because when you're younger, your incomes are lower and generally speaking, people don't have as much education around their own finances and their own money. So if I was speaking to a friend who was 30 and wanted to get into property, 30 is young, right? And wanted to get into property, my advice would be, first thing you're going to do is look at your budget and look at what your life costs you and where you can trim. Because the reality is you can't get into property without making sacrifices for most people. These are very generally, speaking, but for most people, you can't buy a property and still have a lifestyle where you go overseas and where you go out on weekends. And, even when I bought my first property, I had a very humble lifestyle. Didn't spend much money. All my money went into my mortgage. And before that, all my money went into my deposit. So first step is to look at your budget, look at what you can afford. If that exercise leaves you feeling very depressed and demotivated and you realise there's not much money left over, then that's when I would start to think about what are your options. If you want to invest in property, you probably need to think about it, or buy your first home or invest, whatever it is, but you need to start thinking about it, I would say 2 years before you plan to buy, and put together a strategy on how you're going to make that happen. And it could be that, like my husband did, his first property he bought with his sister, because they both wanted to buy and couldn't afford it, so they went together. You might be able to do that with a friend. You might be able to rent vest, where you continue renting where you are, but you buy a property that's much more affordable in a different location. If you have the availability with your parents to get a deposit that way, I wouldn't shy away from that. I think that's an amazing opportunity if you can do it. Provided it's a win-win. Your parents shouldn't just be giving you 40 grand for no reason.
Correct.
You should be able to have a strategy in place to go, I will be paying you back at this amount, or in 5 years' time, I will revalue and get your deposit back, or however that works. But I think there's a lot of ways you can make it work, but you have to have a plan. You have to get your head out of the sand and really look at where you are now and where you want to be. And you have to be prepared to make sacrifices.
We share the same views on that. I look all the success stories and look at what I've done and all of our clients, the sacrifices. I mean, we've got one client. It's 11 o'clock. That thank you. We've got one client who literally just was on. And I'm not saying that you go to these extremes, but she had other things going on in her life. But that, even where she was eating and she was going down to just like bread and Vegemite. And again, I'm not saying that everybody needs to do that, but she's got a $12 million property portfolio right now.
Yeah.
So you do need to make some sacrifices along the way. I've got 2 more questions for you.
Yep.
Tell me about where you see the market going. I mean, there's a lot of, we spoke about it earlier, you'd have to be you'd have to be on Mars to not pick up what's going on in the market right now.
Yeah.
And I know you've been around for quite some time. You're with a magazine and as an investor, but where do you see the market right now? And in comparison to what we've had what we've seen in the past.
Well, I guess first I would say there is no one market. You know, there's so many different markets. Even when you look at Melbourne, there's areas within Melbourne that do better and worse than other areas. So the first thing to, I guess, understand is there is so many different dynamics at play. But what I would say is this, I've spoken to so many people in the last few weeks and months who are saying this is the worst we've seen. This is the worst it's been. This is a really hard time. And I agree that this is hard. But I can remember when the mining bust happened, you know, in WA and in Queensland, I can remember then people saying this is the worst it's been. And the GFC, that was, I mean, we have really short memories. That was only 11 years ago. And things were so bad, the government gave us all free money. You know, we got this $800 stimulus package just to get us to spend. Interest rates were above 8%. Yeah. I remember locking in one of my rates at the time at 7.2% because there was talk it was going to hit 10% and we were terrified. I was paying insane amounts on my mortgages back then. That felt really, really hard. And this feels really hard as well. But I think the important thing to keep in mind is that property is long term, and if you're worried or if you're scared or if you're not sure what's going to happen, then get support. Reach out for advice and support from someone who knows what they're doing, because fear is the absolute worst place to make a decision from. And whether that's fear of making a decision, like fear of I'm not going to buy property because I'm scared. You know, traditionally, if we look back, when a market is in a down phase is the time to buy. That's when you've got negotiating power. It's when prices are going to be on your side. In 10 years from now, I'm sure there will be people going, remember when I could buy in blah suburb for X just after the boom? You know, so it all comes back to having a plan and a strategy and knowing where you're going and not just kind of blindly muddying your way through.
That's my second question. So planning and strategy, because we have so many people that just buy property for the sake of buying property. And the first thing I say to them is why? It's kind of crazy. Like I almost try and talk them out of it. It's like, that's fine, but why do you want to buy property? And do you know how many properties you need to buy? Do you know when to stop? Do you have an exit strategy? Do you know how to turn these properties into cash?
And the really interesting thing is I interview people for the magazine and they'll have 5 or 6 or 7 properties. And I'll say, you know, one of my first questions, so why did you get into property? Oh, I just saw people doing it, thought it was a good idea. Okay. What's your strategy? I don't really have one. And that's always, to me, a bit gobsmacking that you're 7 properties in or 4 properties in and you're just buying them. And I'm like, what's your goal? You know, you have to have a really clear idea of what you're trying to do. Do you want to live off the income one day, or do you want to be able to quit your job in 10, 15 years? Or some people just want 1 or 2 properties as a financial safety net. That's a really good goal. Like everyone who wants to invest in property doesn't need to be aiming for, I'm going to be a millionaire, you know, in 5 years. If you were to just buy 2 properties, that would give you some financial comfort in retirement 30 years from now. So there's so many different reasons to invest in goals. It's just being really clear on why you're doing it in the first place. Yeah,
couldn't agree more. And also, you know, depending on the time that you get into the market. That's why, again, I say to everybody, like, if you, like, don't wait. Like, this game of real estate is long term. So the longer you wait to get in, the longer you have to play the game for.
Yeah.
And if you don't want to be playing this game at the age of 60, 70, you know, get in now. Sarah, it's been amazing. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Really appreciate it. Thanks. It's great. We should do more of these.
Absolutely.
So let's get together next time you're in Melbourne or when I'm up in Queensland. Now the website, it's
YIPMag, so it's YIPMAG.com.au.
Yeah. Get on board, guys. I've been buying this magazine for forever, and when I first got into the market, like I said, it's what is it, $12?
$9.95.
$9.95, right? You want to go see an accountant, you want to go see a solicitor, you want to go see a financial planner, they're going to charge you a couple of grand. You'll probably be able to get a majority of what, I mean, we have a library here of magazines here, you know, YIP magazines. You would have seen it in the promotion we did for this. And some of the articles are amazing, just on tax and asset protection, and even if you want to do a renovation, we were talking about some renos during the break. So get on board, subscribe to the magazine, and we've got a giveaway today as part of our Facebook Live for the best question, I think it is. The one who asks the best question, we're going to give you 12 months free subscription to your investment property magazine. So ask away, get engaging, start sharing the post. We actually announce the winner next Tuesday at our next Facebook Live at 12 o'clock next Tuesday. So you've got a whole week to ask questions, share the post, and good luck. Sarah, thank you once again.
Thank you so much.
Look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. I hope you enjoyed the show.